problem with the northern border is a huge national security issue. The Border Patrol's going to need more resources. We're going to need detention capability. They're going to need more equipment. We're going to need smart technology on the river that's lacking.
Canada absolutely wants to be in a position to decide who comes into our country, and the United States obviously has exactly the same objective. So we'll work with them in partnership because it is a north-south circumstance, but I'm very confident.
Incoming President Donald Trump's border czar Tom Homan there first, calling the situation at the Canada-U.S. border a, quote, huge national security issue. He's referring to the number of irregular crossings, claiming people coming from countries that sponsor terror are using our shared border as a gateway into the U.S. Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc, as you heard right after the border czar there, insists the federal government is managing the situation. So let's dig into the politics of all that with our front bench this evening. Saeed Selvam is here. He's the Vice President and Practice Lead of Public Affairs at National Public Relations. Jamie Ellerton is a conservative strategist and the founding partner of Canaptus Limited. Former NDP Interim National Director Karl Belanger is with us here in studio. He's now the President of Traction Strategies. And a big welcome to Hannah Thibedeau. She's a former news anchor and now an Executive Communications Officer at Global Public Affairs. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. Saeed, I'm going to start with you. We're just a few days in here, and already we have an issue kind of boiling to the top of the pile, right? Right away, this new border czar taking aim at the northern border and issues that he has concerns around. What's your take on how big of a deal the border is going to be as this plays out?
I think it's going to be a huge deal, especially first and foremost, the U.S.-Mexico border. They're going to prioritize a lot of their efforts on that border. But as you've seen, the Canadian-U.S. border is not off the table. So this is something that not only the border czar, but also Donald Trump has spoken to in the past, and other potential picks of Donald Trump's as well, who have obviously criticized the lack of security of the Canada-U.S. border. This has been a criticism since 9/11 in terms of the potential flow of nefarious individuals between both countries. So I think that this continues to be a big problem for the U.S. and going into an actual Trump administration when they unleash their mandate, nothing is off the table for this particular administration. So whether it's more law enforcement, more border guards, you can definitely expect a lot more screening, especially at the ports of entry.
Politically, though, what does it mean for the federal government here in Canada, Jamie? Because, this was toward the end of the interview with the Public Safety Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, they've really changed their posture, right? Since the first Donald Trump administration, where immigration more largely is concerned, the language coming from the Public Safety Minister was very, hard line. You're not going to be accepted here. You will be deported if you try to cross irregularly. Like, what does that tell you about the politics of this for the federal government right now?
Well, I think both in Canada and the U.S. border politics has been quite torqued and shifted quite dramatically. Of course, what you saw from the Trudeau government in the first term was the famous tweet that invited people with open arms, that a lot of people say essentially fueled the human smuggling that led to what we see at Roxham Road continue to kind of trickle through. So for this government, I think when most people think of the Canada-U.S. border, it's more northbound issues. For how Canada is going to manage this going forward, though, it's obviously going to be problematic. What's fact and what's fiction is often something that doesn't stand in the way of Trump and his accolades from taking action. And I think when you look at the issues of the border, Canada is going to have to play a bit of hardball here and kind of put facts into the matter, including all the handguns that cross the border illegally and are killing Canadians on Canadian streets. And so I think the politics of this are going to be quite fractured. I think Canadian public opinion on where border politics and border security has shifted as a result of this government's mismanaging of the immigration file. And I think there's going to be a lot of fractured and acrimonious politics ahead.
It's interesting because I do think there is a shift, Hannah, in public sentiment, let's say, around immigration more largely. But by and large, Canadians still identify, I think, the Liberal brand with that somewhat of a welcoming message. So how do their supporters, at least, I shouldn't say Canadians writ large, but Liberal supporters associate that with their brand? So, how does this government reconcile this new rhetoric, which is very hardline, with what they have used as a brand strength in the past?
Clearly, they're going to have to find ways to work with this new Trump administration. And you can hear it, as you mentioned, in Dominic LeBlanc's tone, but also when it comes to Immigration Minister Mark Miller. He was out there also saying we're going to continue to apprehend people who aren't supposed to be coming across the border, but also playing it as, look, it's for people who don't have the proper means to come into the country. They have the Safe Third Agreement, the arrangement, and took out the sort of mess that they were in at one point, signed that with Biden so that now after 14 days they can send home these migrants that might come across the border at these irregular border crossings. But they do have to show the Trump administration that they are ensuring that the numbers aren't going up coming back to the United States as well. And to do that, you can't have these blasé answers like we heard from Mark Miller and even from Dominic LeBlanc. Yeah, it sounds more harsh, but they're going to have to, as Jamie said, put facts to the information. We're going to put this many border guards up. We're going to show that the RCMP is increasing. We heard Judy Trin provide that information on your show. I think it was last week. What they're going to do to increase the thickening of the border. But out here in Calgary, that's one thing that they are concerned about. They don't want a thickening of the border because that puts stress on businesses. That is, time is money. If they start to thicken the border as well, you're going to start to see the pressures when it comes to business leaders and people even just going across the border on a daily basis, that's going to become a trigger point as well.
But, and I sort of circle back, Karl, to the politics of it, right? Like, if that is all the rhetoric, more border guards, more strength at the border, like that's not necessarily what we associate with, like a hard line on immigration is not what we have previously associated with this government. Is it a sign of the times that that's where they're headed? Is it going to be difficult to reconcile that for their supporters, do you think?
I think a little bit, but also, you know, in as much as the Trump administration is coming in, there's been a lot of pressure from some provincial governments as well on this issue. And so Canada works that way to, you know, allege some of that pressure that's coming from Quebec mostly, Ontario as well. Other provinces have joined in. And but the truth is that the rhetoric does not match the fact unless you build a wall. Because, you know, we have the longest undefended border in the world. Of course, you can have irregular crossings, and adding a few border guards and a few controls and a few patrols won't change that. In fact, if you look at the Google map, do the exercise, you look at the border crossing spot across the country. There are so many. It is impossible to control them all. So what you're going to do, if you start controlling the easy access, like we did with Roxham Road, people start crossing across the lake using, you know, all kinds of lifeboat and things like that, and you endanger them. So is that the solution, really? And that's where the Liberal supporters will not be pleased if you get some of these stories coming up because of this, what's happening right now.
Well, yeah, that's just to follow up quickly. That's what I imagine, like when they have to reconcile. I mean, it's one thing to say you're going to do stuff, but then when you start turning back people, let's say, who are from Haiti, who will ultimately be deported back there when we see all the violence, but like, how are you going to do that pragmatically?
That's right, because, you know, it's one thing to say you will do things, but, you know, thankfully for us, I think the Americans' pressure will be on the Mexican border more than the Canadian border, and we have friends with the United States northern governors who also want, as Anna said, to keep those that border fairly wide open because it's good for business and it's good for the people. If suddenly you start seeing cases of people drowning, dying, crossing and getting lost in the snowstorm and dying, and that's on the Trudeau government, is going to pay a big political price for that.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to leave this part of our discussion there. We'll take a quick break. On the other end of that break, we talked about it earlier. Donald Trump named some new, probably his most controversial picks yet for cabinet. Matt Gaetz as Attorney General, Tulsi Gabbard heading up National Intelligence. We're going to talk about what all that tells us about what Trump's administration will be like. That's next. Stay right there.